Hello students, this is Divarchana Raut, lecturer in computer science. In our previous slides, we have already discussed about some of the components of the motherboard that are placed on the printed circuit board, or we can say motherboard. We have discussed about processor slots, RAM slots, what is BIOS. We have discussed about BIOS. So today we will continue from the BIOS. That what is BIOS? It is a ROM chip, that is read-only memory chip, which is basically written by the manufacturer or created by the manufacturer and is installed on the motherboard in order to set up some basic instructions at its basic level, that is we can say some basic booting instructions, or we can in general we can say after switch oning a computer and to get the Windows page, all those instruction is run by the BIOS only. So we will now discuss about what are the basic function that a BIOS includes. So first basic function that the BIOS includes is the post function. What is post? Post is the abbreviation of power on self test. So it is the test that the computer hardware components done on the computer hardware components, that it makes sure that no error exists before loading the operating system. So power on self test is a basic test done by the BIOS chip, that each and every hardware component that is connected to the computer are working properly or not, or they are showing some errors. If they are not working properly, they will not pass the post test and it will show some error messages or some beep sounds, unusual beep sounds, error sounds. So it is needed that before loading the operating system, all the hardware components must work properly. For that we use post to check whether they are working or not working, or we have some error. So next is the bootstrap loader. It is basically, we can say, it loads the operating system or it locates the operating system. If a capable operating system is located, the BIOS will pass the control to it. So we can say bootstrap loader loads the operating system. So basic function of our BIOS is, first is post, that it checks all the computer hardware are working properly or not. Next, it loads the operating system. Next comes the BIOS driver, the low level driver. This gives the computer basic operational control over the computer hardware. So all the hardware components are working, all these operational controls are done by the BIOS drivers. Next is, the last is the BIOS setup, or we call it as CMOS setup. We already know we don't have to do anything with the BIOS chip, as it is written, pre-written by the manufacturer. We only can do that we can read all those instructions. That is why it is a ROM memory chip, read-only memory chip. So what is CMOS? There are some configurations that allow users to configure hardware settings, such as to change password, to set a password, to set time and date in the computer. All these user configurations are provided by the BIOS setup, or we can say a CMOS setup. We will be next reading about the CMOS only. So what is CMOS? No, CMOS is nothing but it is a 3-volt of battery which is used to update or change all the user configurations in the system. So motherboard includes a small separate block of memory made from CMOS RAM chip, which is kept alive by a battery, or we can say a 3-volt of battery, which is known as CMOS battery, even when the PC is power off. So once we set all the settings, so how we need to keep it, or how we need to keep it as a non-volatile memory. So a battery is being attached as a battery. We can see in the diagram the CMOS chip here. It is just like a battery cell that is given in a watch. So it keeps alive all the settings or user configuration settings done to the system. This prevents reconfiguration when the PC is powered on. CMOS drives require a very little power to operate. So it is basically a 3-volt battery. We can see it in the diagram. This is the CMOS 3-volt battery, or we can say it as CMOS backup battery 2. So we will see some of the functions, or what are the configurations, user configurations as CMOS assure. The CMOS RAM is used to store basic information about the PC's configuration, such as floppy disk and hard drive types, information about CPU, RAM size, as we have already discussed, date and time, password, serial and parallel port informations, plug and play informations, power saving settings, and some important data are also kept as CMOS memory in the time and date, which is updated by the RTC, that is real time clock. Next we will discuss about the clock generator and the RTC. The clock generator in a motherboard is often changed by computer manufacturer in order to control the speed of the CPU, of the front side bus, of the graphic port unit, and also of the random access memory. So basically, clock generator handles or controls the speed or processing speed of processing of the CPU, FSB, GPU and RAM. Next we will come to RTC. We have already discussed RTC in the ROM chip. It is the real-time clock. It is the computer clock that keeps the track of the current time. It is often found in the integrated circuit. Here we can see the RTC placed over the motherboard, and it is powered with the CMOS battery. It provides the accurate date and time in addition to allowing the regulation of time and speed of all the functions in the system. So basically it sets the current or accurate time and date, and also keeps the timing and speed of all the functions and operations done in the system. Next we will be discussing about the keyboard and mouse connectors. We already know, and basically we have seen in the ports there is keyboard and mouse connections, which is of purple and green color. So keyboard mouse connectors are basically of two types. Previously it was 80 style keyboard connectors, and now we have mini DIN PS2 style keyboard, mouse and keyboard connectors. So next we will discuss about IO controller. IO controller are a series of microchips, which is family of Intel Southbridge microchip, which helps in the communication of data between the CPU and the motherboard. The main purpose of this system is to help in the interaction of all the internal and external peripheral devices with the control units. The IO controller helps in the connection and control of various peripheral devices which are both the input and output devices. So we can summarize as it communicates between the CPU and the motherboard and all the input and output peripheral devices. Next is an important concept, that is power connector. Power connector is the basic requirement of a system, that is the power supply to the motherboard and different parts and components of the system. So we call it as ATX power connector, which is advanced technology extended connector, power connector. It provides a number of peripheral power connectors and two connectors for the motherboard, which is a 8-pin which is 4+4 auxiliary pins connector, and some additional power to the CPU and the main of 24-pin power supply connector as an extension of the original 20-pin version. So we basically find the ATX power supply in two forms, that is a 20-pin connector and also a 24-pin power supply connector. Basically in 20-pin is used for your single processors, and a 24-pin, that is extra 4-pin connector, is used for multi-processors, that is dual processors or more than 2 processors in a system. The standard voltage level required in power supply of a computer center is much lower than that's visible. So there are basic ranges of different voltage range a system consumes power, that is 12 volts, minus 12 volts, 5 volts and 3.3 volts. These are the basic 4 ranges of volts a system consumes. Next we will be discussing about switches and jumpers. So first we will discuss about the switches. So it is the first switch we will discuss is DIP, that is dual inline package switches. These are small electronic switches which are basically like a normal switch that is found on the circuit board, which can be turned on and turned off like our normal switches. It is a pointed object just like a tip of a screwdriver or a pen top. So this is basically very small in size, so it is taken care when cleaning near the DIP switches. So if while cleaning some solvents may destroy them, so DIP switches are absolutely very delicate and are very, when cleaned, are very taken care. So basically we don't find them in the modern systems. This is basically found in the old computer systems. So next we will be discussing about jumper pins and jumper caps. Both these are used in order to for the plug-in and plug-off concept, so that it can place one electrical circuit for the power supply. So jumper pins are the small projecting pins on the motherboard. A jumper cap or bridge is used to connect the short pair of jumper pins. When the bridge is connected to any two pins via a sorting link, it completes the circuit and a certain configuration is been activated. That is, if the pins are joined with the jumper caps, if any two pins are being joined to the jumper cap, then it creates some configuration and we get the output. Next, what are the jumper caps? These are the metal bridges that close or that either creates or breaks an electrical circuit. It is a plastic plug that fits over a pair of projecting pins. So jumper are sometimes used to configure the expansion boards. So this much for this slide. We will discuss more in the next slides. Thank you.